The game appeared out of nowhere. Elliot wasn't searching for anything unusual. He had been scrolling through obscure gaming forums, the kind that catered to enthusiasts of forgotten, glitched-out relics from the early days of the internet. He loved digging up strange and abandoned games, titles buried so deep in the web that even their creators had seemingly disowned them. It was a hobby, a passion, maybe even an obsession. That's when he found it. A thread with 0 replies, buried under pages of other discussions. The title was vague, Forbidden Game, Do Not Download. Clicking on it, Elliot found only a single post. A link, nothing more. No description, no comments, no context. Just a username, Deadbyte, and a timestamp from over a decade ago. Most people would have ignored it, but not Elliot. These kinds of eerie, forgotten things excited him. They were digital ghost stories, mysterious artifacts from a time before gaming was so polished and predictable. Without hesitation, he clicked the link. The download was instant. A single, nameless.exe file appeared on his desktop. No developer credits. No installation process. Just play.exe. He hesitated for a moment. There was something unsettling about how final it seemed. No loading bar, no prompts. Just the icon, sitting there, waiting. Curiosity won. It always did. He double-clicked. At first, it seemed like nothing happened. The screen remained black, his monitor humming faintly. Then a flicker. A line of crimson text appeared in the center of the void. Welcome, player. Static crackled in his headphones, an eerie whisper behind the words. The screen shifted, revealing a pixelated menu, rudimentary, almost archaic. The only option available was start. Something about it sent a chill down his spine. He couldn't explain why. It was just a game. Still, his fingers hesitated over the keyboard. And then, without his input, the game started. The world rendered slowly, shapes twisting and shifting as if they were unsure of their own existence. The graphics were crude, grainy, distorted. A first-person perspective. No weapons, no HUD, no tutorial. Elliot found himself standing in a dimly lit hallway, the walls stained with something dark. The air felt thick, oppressive. A sound looped faintly in the background, distant breathing. There were no instructions, no objectives. Just the hallway stretching endlessly in both directions. His pulse quickened. The game felt wrong, but in a way that intrigued him. It wasn't like anything he had played before. The air of unpredictability, the lack of guidance. It made him feel like he had stumbled into something truly unknown. He moved forward. The controls were oddly fluid for such a seemingly old game. Each step echoed, the sound design unnervingly realistic. He turned a corner. A door. It was the only thing in the hallway that seemed real. Everything else had a dreamlike quality, but the door looked solid, tangible. The wood was splintered, the handle rusted. A feeling of unease settled in his stomach. He clicked to open it. A message flashed on the screen. Are you sure? His finger hovered over the mouse. He had played horror games before. This was just a scare tactic, a way to build tension. It was working. The door creaked open. The screen glitched violently, the world stuttering into broken fragments. Then silence. Elliot found himself inside a small, windowless room. A single chair sat in the center. And in that chair was himself. Elliot's breath caught in his throat. The pixelated figure in the chair was an exact replica of his in-game avatar. Same clothes, same posture, same subtle movements. He moved his mouse. The figure shifted, mirroring his actions with a fraction of a second delay. It was just a trick, he told himself. A clever design choice. But then the figure lifted its hand and waved. Elliot did not. The wave had been independent of his input. His heart began to pound. A new message blinked onto the screen. Who is playing who? The figure in the chair stood up. Elliot yanked his mouse backward, trying to step away, but his character didn't move. Instead, the figure took a step forward, moving towards the screen. Towards him. The screen flickered again, the static returning, louder this time. The game seemed to distort, the walls of the room warping, bending inward like they were collapsing. The breathing sound from before grew louder, no longer distant. And then, for the first time, Elliot heard something new. A whisper. Not from the game. From behind him. He spun around in his chair, his blood running cold. His dimly lit bedroom was exactly as he had left it, except for the monitor. The screen was no longer displaying the game. It was displaying him. Not a reflection, not a camera feed. It was him, sitting at his desk, his back turned to the screen, exactly as he was now. His breath hitched. His real-life movements weren't being mirrored. The figure in the game was still facing forward. It was watching him. His stomach churned with dread. He reached for the keyboard, his fingers trembling, but before he could press anything, the screen flickered once more. The figure leaned in closer. A new message appeared. "Let me out." Elliot slammed his laptop shut. His chest heaved as he tried to calm his breathing. It was a game, just a game. There had to be an explanation. Maybe some kind of weird alternate reality gimmick, a prank, an elaborate horror experience designed to mess with players. But deep inside, something felt off. A new noise reached his ears. A low, rhythmic clicking. Not from the computer. From the closet behind him. Elliot sat frozen, his pulse hammering in his ears. The clicking continued, soft, deliberate. It sounded like nails tapping against wood. He hadn't opened his closet in days. Slowly, heart pounding, he reached for his phone. The screen was black. A shiver ran down his spine. He stood up, every nerve screaming at him to run, but something, some primal, suffocating fear, held him in place. The clicking stopped. Silence. The closet door creaked open. Something moved inside. Not something. Someone. And they were wearing his clothes. Elliot couldn't breathe. His closet door had drifted open, revealing a shadowed figure standing in the darkness. Its features were obscured, but one thing was clear: it was wearing his clothes. His hoodie. His jeans. Even his scuffed sneakers. His mind raced for an explanation. Had someone broken in? Was this a prank? A hallucination? Then the figure stepped forward. The dim light from his monitor caught its face. Elliot's stomach lurched. It was him. Not just someone who resembled him, but an exact, horrifying replica. But it was wrong. The skin was too pale, almost grayish. The eyes were slightly too large, their whites tinged with a sickly yellow hue. The mouth was stretched into an unnatural grin, lips thin, cracked. The most disturbing part, however, was the way it moved. Its body twitched, each motion stuttering like a glitching video game character. Elliot stumbled back, nearly tripping over his chair. What the hell are you? The figure took another step forward. Its mouth opened, lips stretching too wide. Then, in a distorted, garbled voice, it spoke. "Let me out." Elliot's blood ran cold. It was the same message that had appeared on his screen. This isn't real. This isn't real. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead. He reached blindly for anything he could use as a weapon. His phone, his keyboard, anything, but his fingers found nothing. The figure moved closer. It tilted its head at an unnatural angle, mimicking him, mocking him. Then, in that same broken, glitching voice, it whispered, "You let me in." Elliot felt his breath hitch. No, this wasn't possible. This had to be a nightmare. His heart pounded as he reached for the only thing he could think of, his laptop. He yanked it open, hoping, praying, that he could shut the game down, break whatever spell had been cast. The screen flickered to life. But it wasn't the desktop. The game was still running. And on the screen was his room. From behind him. His hands trembled as he moved the mouse. The camera view on the screen shifted slightly, as if something in the game was moving closer to him. Then the figure on screen, his doppelganger, turned its head toward the camera and grinned. Elliot slammed the laptop shut again. The air in the room felt thicker, charged with something unnatural. His ears rang with silence, the kind of oppressive quiet that made every breath feel too loud. When he looked up, the closet door was closed. The figure was gone. Elliot didn't sleep. He sat in his chair, clutching his phone, eyes darting between the closet and the laptop. Hours passed. Nothing happened. At some point, exhaustion overtook his fear, and as the first light of dawn crept through his blinds, he allowed himself to believe maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe stress, sleep deprivation, and too many horror games had finally broken his brain. He forced himself to stand, limbs aching from staying tense all night. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped toward the closet. With shaking hands, he grabbed the doorknob. It was cold. Bracing himself, he yanked the door open. Empty. His clothes hung neatly, untouched. His old sneakers were still at the bottom, exactly where he had left them. Nothing was out of place. His mind had been playing tricks on him, right? He let out a shaky breath, forcing a bitter laugh. Jesus, Elliot, get a grip? Closing the closet, he grabbed his laptop. He was done with this game. Whatever it was over. He needed to delete it, wipe it from existence. He opened the lid. The screen was black. No desktop, no game. Just a single line of text blinking in crimson. You can't delete me. Elliot's stomach twisted. His fingers hovered over the power button, but before he could shut it down, the screen changed again. A new message. You brought me here. His pulse pounded in his ears. His hand trembled as he finally held down the power button. The screen flickered, then shut off. Silence. Elliot exhaled slowly, trying to steady his nerves. He had no idea what was happening, but he needed out. He grabbed his jacket and bolted out the door, leaving his apartment behind. The morning air was crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of his room. He walked aimlessly, trying to shake the feeling of unease that clung to him like a shadow. He needed coffee. Something normal. The nearest cafe was only a few blocks away. As he approached, he pulled out his phone, desperate for distraction. Still dead. He frowned. Maybe the battery drained overnight. As he entered the cafe, the smell of roasted coffee beans did little to calm his nerves. He ordered a black coffee, paid in cash, and found a seat near the window. Deep breaths. It was just a game. That's all it had been. Some messed up, viral horror experiment meant to mess with players. Maybe it ran some hidden AR code that hijacked webcams, creating the illusion that it was watching him. There had to be a logical explanation. He just needed to delete it from his system when he got home. Maybe even factory reset his laptop, just to be safe. He took a sip of coffee, savoring the bitter taste. Normalcy. Reality. Then he glanced at the cafe window. And his blood turned to ice. Outside, across the street, someone was watching him. Not just someone. Himself. Standing perfectly still, hands in his pockets, wearing the exact same clothes as Elliot. The same jacket. The same hoodie. Their eyes met. The other Elliot grinned. Elliot's breath hitched. His grip on the coffee cup tightened. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Then in one slow, deliberate motion, the thing outside raised its hand. And waved. Elliot shot up from his seat, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The barista glanced over, startled. His eyes darted back to the window. The street was empty. Nothing. No one. His stomach churned. His hands were clammy, sweat pooling at his temples. He turned, stumbling toward the cafe bathroom. He locked the door behind him, gripping the sink. His reflection stared back, pale and shaken. Then his phone vibrated. Heart hammering, he pulled it from his pocket. The screen was on. A new message. From an unknown number. With shaking hands, he opened it. You can't run from yourself. A photo was attached. Elliot hesitated, bile rising in his throat. He tapped it. It was a picture of him. Not a selfie. Not from his phone. Elliot stared at the photo, standing at the cafe window. Sweat, taken his from vision outside. Blurred as his breath came in short, shallow bursts. It wasn't possible. It shouldn't have been possible. The image was sharp, too precise, taken from outside the cafe at the exact moment he had locked eyes with himself. But he hadn't taken it. The phone vibrated again. Another message. His thumb hovered over the screen, his instincts screaming at him not to look. But some twisted compulsion, something darker than fear, forced him to open it. Stop looking for me. Elliot felt an icy shiver run down his spine. His grip on the phone tightened as he fought the urge to smash it against the bathroom sink. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some elaborate game gimmick. Something was watching him. No, something was pretending to be him. His reflection in the mirror stared back at him, skin pale, lips bloodless. He swallowed hard, eyes flicking down to the sink. He needed to get home. Delete the game. Burn the laptop if he had to. Whatever this was, it started with that download. Elliot turned sharply toward the door, ready to bolt. Then, behind him, his reflection didn't move. He froze. His breath hitched in his throat. Slowly, with deliberate horror, he turned his head back toward the mirror. His reflection was still staring straight ahead. His real body was angled toward the door, but in the glass, he stood perfectly still. A cold wave of nausea rolled through him. Then, his reflection did something even worse. It smiled. A slow, creeping grin stretched across its face, not his own. The lips cracked open, revealing teeth that looked wrong. Too sharp. Too many. Elliot staggered back, his pulse hammering. He watched in paralyzed horror as the mirrored version of himself took a step forward. But Elliot didn't move. It was moving on its own. The fluorescent lights above flickered violently, casting his reflection in fragmented shadows. Then, the glass rippled like disturbed water. And his reflection reached out. A hand, identical to his own but slightly off, pressed against the inside of the mirror. Like it was a window. Or a door. Elliot barely managed to choke back a scream. His body reacted before his mind did. He turned, slammed open the bathroom door and ran. The cafe was quiet, people sipping their drinks, lost in their own worlds. Nobody noticed him sprinting out, his face pale as death. The morning sunlight hit him like a slap, but it didn't make him feel any safer. He didn't stop running until he was several blocks away, lungs burning. His phone vibrated again. Another message. He didn't want to look. But dread forced his eyes down. This time, there was no text. Just another photo. His throat closed. The image showed the cafe bathroom mirror. The camera perspective was from inside the mirror, looking out. And the reflection? It was still standing there. Waiting. Elliot didn't remember how he got home. His legs felt like they were moving on autopilot, his mind a scrambled mess of panic and disbelief. The moment he reached his apartment door, he hesitated. What if it was already inside? What if he had brought it back with him? His fingers clenched into a fist. He couldn't hesitate now. He had to end this. Taking a deep breath, he shoved open the door. His apartment was silent. Too silent. The air felt heavier, thick with something he couldn't name. Every shadow seemed to shift at the edges of his vision. He didn't bother checking the rooms. He went straight for his laptop. Yanking it open, he was met with a black screen. Then, slowly, text began to type itself out. You should not have left. Elliot's breathing came ragged and uneven. His hands trembled as he moved the mouse, trying to force the computer to shut down. The text changed. You let me in. Now you have to finish the game. The screen flickered. Then the game booted up on its own. The pixelated hallway stretched before him, just as he had left it. But something was different. The walls were no longer empty. They were covered in photos. Photos of him. Some were old childhood pictures. Some were from years ago, taken at places he barely remembered. Some were from today. The bathroom. The street outside. Someone had been watching him. Recording him. Tracking him. His stomach twisted as he moved his in-game character forward. His digital footsteps echoed through the hall. The sound was slightly off, like a second pair of footsteps followed just half a second behind. A door appeared ahead. The same door from before. The one he had opened when this nightmare began. This time, the game didn't ask if he was sure. The door creaked open. Inside was the same room with the chair. And sitting in it was his doppelganger. Only, it wasn't pixelated anymore. The graphics had changed, become unnervingly real. It was him, down to the last detail. The character's head slowly lifted. Then, in perfect unison with Elliot's own voice, it spoke. You need to let me out. A new dialogue option appeared on the screen. It was the first time the game had given him a choice. The words made his skin crawl. Let him out. His fingers hovered over the mouse. His mind screamed at him to shut the laptop, to throw it across the room, to do anything but choose. Then he noticed something. The screen wasn't just showing the game anymore. It was showing his room. The live feed of him sitting at his desk. Only, something was standing behind him. Something with his face. Elliot's breath hitched. He spun around. The closet door was open again. A whisper came from the dark. "Let me out." Elliot's chest clenched as he stared at the open closet door. The darkness inside was impossibly deep, swallowing the light from his screen. The whisper echoed again, slithering through the silence like a breath against his ear. "Let me out." His whole body tensed, his mind screaming at him to move, to run. But he sat frozen, paralyzed by something beyond fear. The game screen flickered. His doppelganger still sat in the chair, head tilted at a sickening angle, eyes locked onto him. The same words repeated. "Let him out." But Elliot swallowed hard. His hand shook as he hovered over the mouse. He knew what he should do. He should run. Shut the laptop. Destroy it. Leave the apartment. But something in him, something deep, something primal, knew that running wouldn't matter anymore. This wasn't just a game. It was inside his world now. The laptop screen glitched violently, distorting the image of his room, making it hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. Then, the doppelganger in the game moved. Its body twitched, bending unnaturally as it stood up from the chair. Elliot sucked in a breath. It had never moved before. On the screen, the creature took a step toward him. Then another. And then, the game camera shifted. No longer showing the chair. No longer showing the room. It was now facing his closet. Elliot's breath caught in his throat. His real closet. He turned back toward it. The darkness inside seemed deeper, like a hole carved into the fabric of reality itself. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel it. Something was watching him from inside. Something wearing his face. It was waiting. A sudden noise shattered the silence. A knock. But not from the closet. Elliot's head whipped toward the apartment door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Someone was outside. His heart pounded against his ribs. His instincts warred within him, answer the door, or keep his eyes on the closet. His phone buzzed on the desk. Another message. He glanced down. Unknown number, don't open it. His blood ran cold. Another knock. Harder this time. A voice. Muffled, distorted, but still his own. "Elliot, let me in." His stomach twisted. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. He turned back to the game. The screen was frozen, the closet still open in the game world, but his doppelganger was gone. His hands clenched into fists. He had 2 choices. Open the door. Face whatever was outside. Turn back to the closet. See what was really waiting in the dark. Neither option felt like survival. The knocking stopped. Silence. A slow creak. Elliot's breath hitched. The doorknob was turning. His body moved before his mind could catch up. He lunged for the door and slammed the deadbolt into place. A second later, the knob twisted violently, jerking back and forth as if something, was trying to get in. A low, guttural chuckle came from the other side. "You already let me in once." Elliot's body went rigid. The voice was clearer now. Closer. Like it wasn't coming from the hallway anymore. Like it was inside the apartment. The closet. His blood turned to ice. Turned, too slow. The laptop screen flickered wildly, casting eerie, shifting light into the room. Shadows twisted along the walls, elongating into something else. Something standing behind him. The air turned suffocating. He could feel it. Right there. Breathing. Watching. Grinning. A voice, just above a whisper, crawled down his spine. "You should have chosen run." Elliot's scream barely left his throat before the lights cut out. Darkness. Heavy. Crushing. A static hum filled the air, drowning out all thought. Elliot gasped, struggling to move, but his limbs felt weighed down, his body sluggish. It was as if reality had folded in on itself. A sharp, blinding flash. The game booted back up. The distorted menu screen reappeared, but now there was only one option. Continue. Elliot had no choice. His hands moved on their own. He clicked. The screen shifted to a first-person perspective. But this time, it wasn't the game world. It was his apartment. The exact layout. The same flickering light. His laptop screen glowing in the dark. And in the center of the screen, a chair. With someone sitting in it. His doppelganger. The in-game camera tilted down, showing his own hands bound to the chair's arms. Elliot's breath came in short, panicked gasps. He reached for the power button on his laptop, fingers trembling. The screen glitched. A new message appeared. "It's your turn now." Elliot's reflection in the screen blinked. And then, it smiled. Not at the camera. At him. The static surged, the shadows collapsed inward. And then, silence. The game closed on its own. The laptop screen faded to black. Elliot was gone. The chair sat empty. But the closet door? Still open. Still waiting. A new message blinked on the screen. The screen was black. A single line of text. Silent. Player 2 was gone, waiting for connection. The chair where he had sat moments before was empty, facing the lifeless glow of his laptop. The closet door remained slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness yawning into the room. And on the screen, a single line of text pulsed in the void. Player 2, waiting for connection? A soft creak. The laptop flickered back to life. The game reopened on its own, pixelated graphics forming the familiar hallway Elliot had walked so many times before. But now, something was different. The first-person perspective was wrong. The hands visible at the bottom of the screen were his. No longer pixelated. They trembled slightly, mirroring the exact way his hands had trembled moments before he vanished. As if he was still in the game. Trapped. And something else was controlling him. Somewhere else. Elliot's mind snapped awake, his consciousness lurching like a ship in a storm. The world around him was glitching. A distorted, looping version of his apartment. Walls stretching and twisting at unnatural angles. The furniture was wrong, shifting between states of existence, as if the game couldn't decide what was real. And in the center of the room, the chair. He was sitting in it, bound. His breath came in ragged bursts, the sensation of cold restraints digging into his wrists. A screen flickered in front of him, his own laptop, but from inside the game. He could see his own face reflected in the glass. But behind him, no. Something was there. A shadowed figure, identical to him in every way but wrong in all the ways that mattered. It loomed behind him, hands resting on the back of the chair, its breath slow and deliberate. It leaned closer. Then, in his own voice, it whispered, "It's time to switch places." Back in the real world, the laptop remained open, the game running silently. A new prompt appeared. 2 options. Take control. Disconnect. The cursor hovered over the first option. And then, without a human hand to guide it, it clicked. Elliot stood up. At least, something that looked like Elliot. He moved stiffly at first, adjusting to his body, his limbs awkward, like someone learning to walk for the first time. Then, a slow, easy stretch, his movements becoming more fluid, more natural. He turned, facing the laptop, staring at his own reflection in the dark screen. But behind that glass, in the depths of the digital abyss, Elliot was still there, trapped, eyes wide, mouth open in a soundless scream. His real body, now occupied by something else, tilted its head, studying him. A grin spread across its face. It reached forward and closed the laptop. The screen blinked out. The only sound in the apartment was the soft click of the lid shutting. And then, footsteps. Heading for the door. Elliot, or what had become of him, was free. And he was leaving. The game was over. At least for him. But on the laptop, in the darkness beneath the closed screen, a single message pulsed in the void. Waiting. Waiting for player 3. Waiting for you. Would you like to play?